Coach Joy here with Real Progressives. Tonight I am joined by David Hildebrand. He is running in California for U.S. Senate. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, David. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You've been requested by a number of our viewers. And California, I was kind of putting off a little just because I wanted to get the other states out of the way first. But
Yeah.
seems like this week is a California week, which I love. So you are actually running for U.S. Senate, meaning that literally anyone in the entire state of California can vote for you. So
That's
have you been
correct.
traveling the state? I know
Yeah,
today you were on an airplane.
yeah. So most of the state I've already traveled multiple times. I actually over the weekend I was in Redding on Saturday, and then Mount Shasta, and then I came all the way back to Sacramento for an event here, and then I went up to Chico for another event there and came back. And then Tuesday I flew down and did an event in Orange County at Costa Mesa, and then I met up with a friend at the Bernie Coffee Shop to deliver signs, and then I came back up here. I literally landed conveniently just in time for rush hour traffic, and then I got here and set up real quick, and now I'm here on this video. So yeah, we've been all over the state, just like to Chico alone, we've been there 8 times. So we've been very busy and traveling as far and wide as we can.
That's amazing. So as far as so you did choose to run as a Democrat. As someone who's in California and who saw some of the worst cheating and everything that went on, why did you choose to run as a Democrat?
Well, you have to remember in California, we were within 60 seats in the chair election from taking over the entire party for progressives. So we are fighting a battle here that's different than the one on the national level. We are actually within striking distance of owning the Democratic Party and making it an actual working people's party. Now, in other states or on the national level, would I say to do the same thing? No. The second reason is because in California, we vote Democratic despite how we register. So even though no party preference is the fastest growing party registration or non-party registration in California, Democrats have about 37, I think, percent now, and Republicans 25. But then in the general election, even with a candidate like Hillary, 60% of California voted for her. So, and we were like the safest election to basically vote your values and vote whoever you wanted, and people still went for Hillary and still voted for her. So it's a no-loss situation. I voted for Jill Stein myself. But it was a no-loss situation. I can do that because we have California privilege, which means I don't have to, hold my nose and vote for the lesser of two evils because everyone else is basically going to do that automatically. So we have a different situation here. But like I said, if it was a national level, there's not a lot of hope there at this time. And if it was in a different state, then I might not say the same thing.
Right, that totally makes sense. As far as there was something that went on, I want to say it was probably 2-3 months ago, where you had to pay money to be considered to be endorsed by the. What can you explain that process? Because I know it's different for every state.
Yeah, so in California, to apply to be endorsed by the party for U.S. Senate, you have to put in an application and pay $1,000. On top of that, that means you go to the convention, which I did anyway, even though I didn't apply for the endorsement. But at the convention, if you're going to go for the endorsement, you really want a table, so that's $1,500. So we're already at $2,500, and that's not including travel expenses and materials and all that, and food and whatnot. So we decided against going for the party's endorsement, one, because of the expense, but the real reason is because we knew we weren't going to get it. And there was no point in us trying for it and spending all those donations to $2,500 and $27 or less donations to apply for the party nomination that probably wouldn't even help us even if we did get it when it comes to our own grassroots. So we also felt that was more bowing to the party's wishes, and we didn't want to do that either. So we actually asked people to vote no endorsement. Most people actually voted for either De Leon or Pat Harris as their protest vote. So it is what it is at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because we blocked anyone from getting the endorsement going forward. So now neither of them have the benefit, either Feinstein or De Leon. Neither of them have the benefit of going forward with the party endorsement and the mailers and everything that goes along with that.
Right on. You actually you beat out Kevin. How do you say it, De Leon?
Yeah.
Okay, you actually beat him out for the Los Angeles Democratic endorsement, which is pretty awesome.
So that, just to be specific, that's for the Feel the Burn Democratic Club in Los Angeles, which is also an Our Revolution affiliate.
Now, what are the main differences between yourself and Kevin?
Well, Kevin has a long career of taking corporate donations from, the typical healthcare companies and whatnot, all the way down to companies like Raytheon. They only donated $2,000 to him as a state senator, but at the same time, they're donating to them at the time as a business. But that's a foot in the door for future votes and future support. So I abhor war. I am the anti-war candidate in this race. That's one of my biggest issues. And to see someone take money from the military-industrial complex, which is what Feinstein does, and which is one of the reasons I'm running against her, is a very bad sign to me of what's to come. So I see this as another Hillary, and a worse person, race, not necessarily a Trump, but a worse person. And I don't want to vote for the lesser of two evils. When I jumped in the race, no one else was even in the race. Feinstein hadn't even announced. And the reason I got in is to be a corporate-free option for people, so that when they got their ballot, they would actually have an option, so they wouldn't have to vote for the lesser of two evils. So I think that still stands.
Right on. Do you think are you the only candidate who does not take
corporate donations?
Yeah.
So there's 32 people on the ballot, and the majority of them do not take corporate donations, and the majority of them don't because they won't get them anyway. So it's not that they don't want to take them, it's that they won't get them anyway. And there's a couple other progressives on the ballot who aren't taking corporate donations. I won't get into it too much, but I'm still in the race because I don't believe that they have what we need for the progressive movement. And as Bernie-crats, I don't believe that they're really shown the background and what we desire in candidates. So I've stayed in the race. I'm fighting till the end because of that.
So there are 32 candidates?
32. So I was joking around. If you're not sure who to pick, just throw a dart because you're going to hit somebody.
Wow.
Yeah.
So now I know in California, I'm not quite positive if this is only for certain seats or if this is overall, but you guys do it differently. You take the top two winners, even if two are Democrats, two are Republicans. Is that going to work for your position as well?
Yeah, so basically it's whoever gets the most votes, the top two people go forward. So like you said, it doesn't matter if it's party or not. So last time around, we had Kamala Harris and Loretta Sanchez running for U.S. Senate, and they were both Democrats. You could complain or argue either whether they were actually Democrats or not, but what really is a Democrat anymore, who knows? But at the end of the day, two Democrats, on paper at least, went forward, and that we voted basically between two Democrats. So that's kind of been how we've been running things here. Of course, when you get into red counties like Northern California, Orange County, and the Eastern and Southern California, then you may have two Republicans end up, for a congressional seat or a state Senate or assembly seat go forward. And then to add, another little aspect to that is local elections. A lot of them are 50% plus one. So if you get 50% of the vote plus one, then you win outright. You don't have to go on to the general election. You've already won that office. So it's difficult to explain the whole system to people when it gets into the all the way down the ballot. But yeah, that's kind of how it works out. And then you have different areas like San Francisco County right now has ranked choice voting for their races. So any local race in San Francisco County is going to be ranked choice. So all their clubs have to do ranked choice too, which a lot of clubs do anyway.
Do you favor that for the entire state of California? Would you like to see that?
Yes, definitely. I'd love to see ranked choice. It would have been perfect for my race, especially because there's so many people in the race, we could actually selected and voted our values, which we should be doing anyway, but some people are going away from. And then for second place, we could have voted the safe vote, or third place, we could have voted the safe vote, quote unquote safe vote. But instead of doing that, it's winner take all. Everyone's has basically gone a different way, and we're going to see what happens.
Absolutely. So as someone who you do have, I see the poster "Unrig the System."
Yeah.
Can you talk about what that is and why you're supporting it?
Yeah, so actually I'm supporting a lot of different issues. As you can see behind me, I put them up to show people that I've been around and I've done these things, but unrigging the system is, for me, it's more than just, one campaign. It's not just electoral politics, it's the stock market. Everything is basically rigged. The news media, even news media outlets we might like, have biases, and they put stuff forward. So it's not just, one system or one entity that's rigged, it's everything. And basically what it's come down to is our elections are rigged, and then once those people get into office that take corporate donations, our government ends up being rigged. So at the end of the day, the voters and the actual people on the ground, they don't really have much of a say. So like if it goes to top two and we have two corporate candidates, the voters don't really have a say between corporate and non-corporate in the general.
So are you hoping that you do get to go against Feinstein? Is that your ideal?
Yeah, I think that would be ideal. It wouldn't be ideal of all the candidates on the ballot. There's probably several others I'd rather go against. It would be great if two progressives went forward, just to have that, safety and fallback so people could pick the best one. Realistically, it's going to be Feinstein. It's going to be one of the top vote getters. And then we're basically everyone else on the ballot is fighting for second place.
Right. You're one of your big things on your platform is campaign finance reform. What made you decide when you first got into it? I know you are a huge supporter of Bernard, so I imagine that kind of inspired you not to take money in some respects, but what was the deciding factor?
For me, there wasn't really ever a deciding factor. It just never was an option for me. I didn't run for office because I wanted to start a career in office. I have a good paying job with benefits with the state. I can retire at 55. So that's the situation I'm in right now. So I'm really not getting any much extra benefit out of possibly getting elected for U.S. Senate, because I basically live very frugal as it is. I'm a backpacker, so that's the kind of mentality I have. You have what you need and you don't have anything extra. So that's the mentality I have. So at the end of the day, it wasn't really like, oh, should I take corporate donations or not? Or am I going to win or not if I don't? It was never a decision. It was always going to be corporate free. That's what Bernie said. If any candidate comes out and says they're a Bernie-crat and they're taking corporate donations, they're lying to your face, because they can't be a Bernie-crat and be a corporate candidate. So that's one of the issues we're facing right now.
100%. You also talk about prison reform, and not a lot of candidates always put that on their platforms. So, I know California is definitely as for-profit prisons. What do you hope to see in the future as far as changing the way things are now?
I'd like to answer both questions. You kind of alluded to something else as well, and that's it's not on a lot of people's platforms. Well, a lot of people take money from the private prisons corporation, so they won't, put that money on their, or put that stuff on their platform, because they'll lose that money and those donations. So for my prison reform, one, we need to legalize marijuana on the federal level. We need to legalize the use of all other drugs. Addicts aren't criminals. They don't belong in prison. They belong in treatment programs where they can actually be cured from their addictions. And we need to focus on actually going after, heroin dealers and manufacturers and cocaine dealers and manufacturers. Leave marijuana completely out of the picture when it comes to drug enforcement, and leave the end user completely out of the picture. Most of the time, like I mentioned, they're addicts. On top of that, once we legalize those activities, then any nonviolent offenders who have been thrown in jail for drug use would be released, and their records would be retroactively expunged. And what that means is you go back and you actually take that crime off their record so it doesn't even exist on their record. When they leave prison, obviously, we need to have a jobs program in place for them. That's why I'm calling for a tuition-free college and trade school program. There's no drug tests or background checks when you go to college. You just go and you learn the skills you need to get a job, and you go get a job. So it kind of flows together into that. If we actually legalize the use of all drugs and release the people from prison who are nonviolent drug offenders, we will actually indirectly close down all private prisons out of lack of necessity of them. And then obviously we need to legislate after the fact, because currently we're paying private prisons for how many beds they fill in their prison, and we actually have quotas dictated through contracts with those private prisons. So we actually get fined by private companies who are for-profit companies for not having enough people in prison. So that's a disgusting system. So we've set up a system of failure, and we set up a system that's for-profit when it comes to our prison system, and that's what we need to reform. There's a lot more on the issue of criminal justice as well in general. That's all on my website. To give you a gist, it's basically we need to reform the system from the bottom up, from police training, body cameras 24/7 at every officer. We need to provide funding for smaller communities that can't necessarily afford those cameras, so those officers will have those cameras as well. So on all the time, those videos need to be released. And one really basic factor that not a lot of people are talking about is when the police go to write their reports after an incident, they need to write their reports before reviewing that footage. So I've mentioned this example before. If you pull a gun, or if the police says, oh, he pulled a gun out of his right pocket or his right side of a waistband with his right hand, and so I feared for my life and shot him, and then he reviews the footage and that's not what happened, and he sees the guy, reach into his left pocket and pull out his phone, then that's a whole different scenario, and he will rewrite his report to say the left hand and the left pocket and still say he saw a gun. So we are basically putting a police officer in the position where he can either be honest about what happened, or he can lose his career and possibly jeopardize his life and possibly go to prison. So that amount of stress on an officer, I highly doubt any human in that situation would choose to do the honest and right thing, unfortunately. I would hope that there would be some out there, but at the same time, we can't put that responsibility on them because we know what will happen next. They will rewrite their reports and they will get out of a crime of murder because of it. So we need to make sure that footage isn't shown to those officers before they write their reports.
That's a really good point, Michelle. We have a viewer that stated they need racial sensitivity training. How do you feel about that? Because it sure seems people of colors, are the victims the majority of the time.
We definitely need that type of training, and we also need mental health training. CHP in California, or the Highway Patrol, which is state police in other states, they actually have a more rigorous training. They also have, I believe it's a 2-week mental health training for contacting people with mental illness. Of course, this is the state police, the Highway Patrol. They're very limited in scope when they don't do inner city stuff, so it's not like they're dealing with people except out on the highways. So that's something we need to focus on for all agencies and maybe lengthen it. Another problem we have with these training programs is mandatory training programs for a lot of the time aren't supported seriously by the people in charge in those police departments. So you'll be playing, the sexual harassment training or whatever, and they're all laughing it off in the classroom, instructor included, and not taking any of it seriously, filling out the test with what they're supposed to say and going back to work and doing the same thing. So if that's what's going to happen with, racial sensitivity training or, just training from people with mental health issues in general, then it's not really going to help. So what we really need at the end of the day is consequences for negative actions, and that's what we don't have. We need consequences built into the system. We need to stop treating police officers as if they're more than human or some sort of royalty. They're human just like the rest of us. They make mistakes, and we can give them some leeway on some of those mistakes, but we can't give them leeway on stuff like murder and abuse, because that's not something that we should allow in our society for anyone, much less a police officer who's, given a role in our society that's, should be a respected role. And of course, with what we've seen is not.
So, and on that note, you on your platform you have equality and human rights. So it's kind of a broad topic. Um, what are what are your reasons for putting that on your platform? What especially are you passionate about?
Well, I think the police and criminal reform and how police are treating communities of color, and also how ICE is treating immigrant communities, is disgusting. We've seen it before. We've seen it happen before, and unfortunately, not enough people step up. Part of running a campaign is winning, and part of running a campaign is being a platform for a message and to send that message out to people. So obviously, most of my opponents won't debate me on stage. Hats off to Pat Harris for doing that. He's been at every single debate. But most of my opponents will not debate me on stage. So that actually cancels out that platform where we can bring this message forward, that we need to make these reforms, that we need to make sure that we actually have equal rights. The Voter Right Act is under attack. We don't have a Dreamer Act passed. We don't have any of those things. So that's what we need to reform, and we need to reform that from the ground up, and we need people to actually go out, on the streets literally, and to the voting booth to make those reforms and support them.
Absolutely. You how about LGBTQ and you know rights as far as that goes?
Sorry, you broke up for a second there. Was that
Oh, I'm
it?
sorry. How do you feel as far as LGBTQ rights?
Yeah, I believe that all humans should be treated equally. If certain communities reject other communities and they're both minority communities, that's an issue. So I stand for everyone's rights. I march in the pride parades. I go and march in the street for DACA and DAPA with the Dreamer movement and everything. So we need to make sure that we're not just standing for our own issues, even if they're important issues, and we need to spread out and stand for all issues. That means going to other people's rallies and not necessarily bringing your own issues there, but making sure you're supporting their issue for the fact that it's their issue. Unfortunately, we have a mentality in the left sometimes where we win our battle for our issue and we say we got ours, screw you all, we're done. And that's not the mentality we should have. Unfortunately, that's a mentality of some clubs within the Democratic Party as well. Certain minority groups will do that. They'll basically win their battle and then just sit down and sit out the rest of the fight, and that's not what we need to see. So we're fighting a battle for trans rights right now, and the LGBT community isn't necessarily stepping up to the plate for trans rights. So we actually need to see them step up to the plate for that. We need to protect every single person based on the fact that they're a human being and not based on the fact of what we may believe about them or how we feel it may affect our own movement or our own issue. We need to be stepping up for everyone's rights and everyone's issues. And like the famous, the quote says at the end, it says, no one was left to stand up for me. And that's what I believe we're seeing right now, even among the left, is we're not having people stand up for each other. And that's really what builds that cohesion in the left. And that's a cohesion that we're really lacking in the left.
Absolutely. As far as voting as Democrats, you spoke a little bit about the negative things in the Democratic Party. How difficult is it to convince people you run into to vote for a progressive as a Democrat?
There's a lot of unfortunate disunity between different people, Green Party, peace and freedom, no party preference, and then us who are in the party who are anti-war, corporate-free, progressive Democrats who are running Democrat based on a strategy. So what I've been doing to try to unify people in the left is I've actually been endorsing candidates outside of the party. I've endorsed a Green for CD5, and I've endorsed a couple independents as well. So I've basically, I've held out my hand, and I'm waiting for, the Green Party, peace and freedom, everything to understand what we're trying to do. Now, I think the thing that confuses people is the progressive delegates in the Democratic Party who are corporate free, who backed Bernie, and who are basically the core of the Democratic or Dem-Inter movement. They cannot publicly endorse or support a non-party candidate. So this upsets people in Green Party or Peace and Freedom or no party preference because the delegates of the party can't do that. That's a limited number of people who can't do that. And if they do, then they'll get their delegate status stripped, and then they'll undermine the very effort that we're trying to do to take over the party. And like I mentioned at the beginning, we were within 60 seats or 60 votes of taking the entire Democratic Party. So we need those votes, and we need more of those votes. So we can't go and put those people at risk. On the other hand, candidates can endorse whoever they want, no matter what party they're in. There's no rules against it. So we have quote unquote liberal Democrats in California who are currently endorsing Republican DAs and sheriffs who are abusing minority communities. So if they can endorse these abusive, offensive people who are in other parties, then why can't we endorse people who are in other parties who are actually good people like Gail McLaughlin, who I've endorsed. She's actually endorsed me as well. But when we cross over like that and show people, it's not, it has nothing to do with party. Everyone has their own strategy going forward after 2016, and everyone's strategy isn't necessarily wrong or isn't necessarily not going to work. What we need to do is stop slitting each other's throats and start moving together as a unit, even if we're in different parties. Because when the day of the election comes, if there's a corporate-free Green in a race, and there's no other, party members or anyone who's corporate free and no one else who's progressive, that's the person I'm going to vote for. I'm going to vote for the corporate free Green. And that's what needs to happen both ways, though. So like in the U.S. Senate race, there's no Green currently in the race. They didn't make it in the ballot. So the logical conclusion to me would be vote for a progressive, corporate free, anti-war Democrat who's running strategically as a Democrat to get into the party and to get the delegates to take over the party. But instead, they won't do that because they take offense to the fact that I have Dem, next to my name on the ballot. So these are issues that we really need to confront. I hope there is actually an effort, after the primary. Well, hopefully before, but at least after the primary, because I think it's gonna really wake a lot of people up to how disunified we are and how much we need that unity. And we don't have that currently. So we need to realize that we can't just win, or we can't win with just our own votes. We need everyone's votes on the left to win. Plus, we need to be able to market to people outside of any party we might be in. And that shows the cohesion, or that's the cohesion we need to get those votes.
Right. There is a huge divide, and it's actually really sad because so many of us want the same exact things. But you're right, like Greens and Dems and Bernie-crats, and there's just this huge divide, and there has been for probably at least over a year. Lisa Walton wants to know, what do you think about primary progressives competing?
Does she mean like people who are in the same race competing against each other? Or does she mean like a primary for progressives?
Lisa, can you kind of expand? She said yes.
Oh, okay. So I'll answer both. So what do I think about progressives in the same races going against each other, basically? There's no way to stop that. What I would like to see is a statewide progressive alliance that picks candidates democratically. I will say that word emphatically, because currently we have some organizations that base their endorsements not democratically on who they pick, and they just select who they will. That's not okay. We need to find a way for progressives to get together and find the best candidate, not based on who's your friend, not based on who you quote unquote think is going to win based on this or that, but based on a democratic election of progressives. The issue is setting that whole process up. That's really hard. What do I think about? Well, that would be like a primary basically within the progressive movement. At the end of the day, what do I think about people running against each other? Obviously, in my race, I have two progressive candidates running against me. I just like to remind people that I was in the race in March 2017. So I've been doing this for over a year. I have loads of experience, 10 years around the legislature, 7 as a legislative analyst. And one organization tried to insert a candidate or decided to insert a candidate into the race who was not a candidate before and gave her all the backing that they had. So that's an issue within the progressive movement, and we need to solve that issue. One organization shouldn't be choosing the progressive slate for the entire nation. That's very dangerous, especially when it's not a democratic election. So we need to really focus on these issues within the Democratic, not within the Democratic Party, within the progressive movement, and we need to address this democratically and go forward that way. Do I think that's going to happen? It would take a lot of organization and a lot of getting people together and unifying people, which is what we need to do anyway. So that's a hopeful thing. But what I'd like to see at the end of the day is a statewide progressive alliance that picks one person, not dependent on party, just depending on who's the best person, picks that one person to go forward. And then, in each race. So basically, at the end of the day, you get your ballot. You have one progressive on every single ballot in the state, no matter where you live, for each office that you can vote for. No one's fighting against each other. Everyone, has their own strategy, their own campaign. And when we donate, we're not donating against other candidates. So that's what we need to see. We didn't see it this year, unfortunately, in a lot of races. Mine is just one example of that happening. But we need to get behind candidates who put themselves out there and decide to run and stop, undermining each other. We've seen a lot of candidates, progressive candidates, drop out because they didn't have the support. So we need to see that support as well.
Absolutely. With social media and how ugly it can get, do you think that we can repair the movement at this point?
I do. I'm a pretty positive guy, so I'll say that out front. But I think there is a chance to improve it. I think we need to realize that there's certain members of the progressive movement that will never be able to be a unifying force because their sole goal is to divide, and their sole goal is ego. So that's an issue. So that's something we have to deal with. We need to be honest with ourselves as a movement and not include a handful of people going forward. But everyone else, we get in arguments, we have disagreements, we endorse this candidate, will you endorse that candidate? At the end of the day, after the election, somebody's going to go forward. It might not even be one of ours. So, and that's not just for my race, that's for all the races. So at the end of the day, we're going to have to reunify after it's all over. And that doesn't necessarily mean unify around a candidate that goes forward. That means unify as a movement, and we need to maintain that unity. So hopefully many people learned, this election that yes, we're going to have disagreements. Yes, we have different strategies. But going forward, we need to remember that we need to rebuild those alliances and strengthen what we have and move forward. Because as I mentioned before, we can't win elections based on just the votes of the progressive movement. That's like De Leon thinking he's going to win, in the public's eye because he got the most votes in the Democratic Party endorsement vote. He got 54%, even though he fell short of the endorsement. That doesn't matter. Most people don't even know that election went on or knew that there was a Democratic convention at all. Like, they had no idea. There's people in San Diego that had no idea, who were within a block of the Democratic convention. They didn't know that it was going on in their city, a block away from where they're having dinner. So that doesn't matter. So at the end of the day, what matters is that we unify. We actually push the voters forward on a popular agenda, which we do have. But what we need is the marketing power, and that comes from a unified force. Canvassers who canvass for one candidate and then go out and canvass for another non-competing candidate for a different race. We can do this with small forces, but we have to be unified on it.
Right on. Lisa Walton actually has a question, a statement. She's said that she's a socialist. You do consider yourself a democratic socialist, correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I am running as a democratic socialist, and I'm a member of the actual organization.
Okay. I wanted to clarify that because she's feeling kind of torn between Dem and socialist, but...
So just to be clear, democratic socialist, the democratic part in it has nothing to do with the Democratic Party. That just means that socialist policies, if they go forward, should be voted on by the majority of the public. So it's kind of like organizing a workplace and forming a union. If 51% of people want a union, they'll be able to get that union. If 51% or more people want single-payer health care, they should get that. And that's a social policy or socialist policy, but it was voted on democratically. So the issue we have now is we do not have democracy at all. Otherwise, we would have programs like that. So in California, a single payer polled as high as 71% in one poll. And it usually bounces between somewhere in high 50 to low 60% of favorable rate. So at the end of the day, we want these policies already. And if you go and find out why we aren't getting them, it's because of corporate donations in our system. So democratic socialists, we have to be corporate free. That's basically the whole deal behind it. That's like the bread and butter behind our movement and progressives in general, because we're never going to get our agenda or our platform policies passed if we're going to elect people who accept corporate donations. That's anathema to everything we believe in. So that's why I specify I'm Democratic Socialist. That's why I am a member of the Democratic Socialists. That's why when I'm in public, when I'm in front of groups that end up endorsing Feinstein, I introduce myself as the corporate-free Democratic Socialist, pro-union, working-class candidate running for U.S. Senate, because that's what matters. And if we go away from that, we might as well just throw in the towel, because we're giving fealty and allegiance to corporate candidates who aren't going to represent us in the end, who will say something one day and then look at their donor list the next day to decide how to vote. So that's not what we want, and that's not democratic. So that's where the democratic part of it comes in.
If you won today, what is the number one thing you would commit yourself to working on?
There's two main things. My personal top of the list item is single payer healthcare. But obviously, we need to get corporate money out of politics, not just by ending Citizens United, but by establishing publicly funded elections. We can do this legislatively if we had politicians who had spines to do that legislatively, and we could actually work through the system that way. The problem is we keep electing people that take corporate donations, and it always goes back in that circle. So if we want to actually change things, then we have to do it that way.
Absolutely. Let's see. It looks like people are it looks like Robert is concerned about a progressive agenda. A lot of people were upset because last night the woman who was elected was the Dem nominee in Georgia for governor. And it turns out that she accepted $63,000 from Soros. But she was the Dem nominee. She won by a landslide. So I guess he's asking, what is the definition of progressive?
So for me, nobody should be accepting over their maximum allowed donation directly to the campaign. That's what I'm running on. There's some situations I've talked about recently where I might, let something like that go. George Soros has been donating a lot to local sheriffs and DA races. He lives in New York. So if he's donating to a DA race somewhere in California or a sheriff's race in California, he literally has no way to benefit from that. It's not a legislative position. They don't make the laws. He's doing it to reform, laws, or not reform laws, but reform the criminal justice system. And I believe that he has good intentions behind that. Where I get concerned is when billionaires and millionaires are donating large chunks of money to legislative seats or to executive seats who actually do make laws in their area and actually do have something to do with that. That's where I draw, the line. I don't believe that they should be donating. At the end of the day, I mean, we're going to vote. We're all going to vote based on our own values. So it doesn't really matter what I say at the end of the day. I mean, some people in the progressive movement are actually voting for Kevin De Leon, despite a history of corporate donations. So, at the end of the day, people are going to make their choices themselves. And that's what they're going to do. So, but I think that it's problematic when we're accepting donations like that. At the same time, can the progressive movement fund their own candidates? In California, I've seen several people drop out because of lack of financial support. So I'm in the race of people actually campaigning, despite the fact that I've done more than a lot of other candidates on the campaign trail. I've actually raised the least money, but at the end of the day, we need to support our progressive candidates and actually donate to them, because several of them have had to drop out for lack of funding.
Absolutely. Do you support a federal job guarantee?
Yes, I do.
Awesome.
That's
And
an easy one.
with that, a lot of I was talking to Gail as well. As far as the Fight for 15, you guys are in California. I'm in Pennsylvania, so 15 even is kind of low. But in Pennsylvania, it's way more feasible than yourselves in California. Is 15 ideally a starting point, or what are your thoughts on that?
So yeah, when I tell people $15 an hour, I don't ever stop there. So what I say is we need a $15 an hour minimum wage federally. So that means on the federal level, no state, no employer can pay their employee less than $15 an hour. But on top of that, that needs to be adjusted to the cost of living to the area where people live. So like here in California, San Francisco, LA area, just Bay Area and LA area in general, in a lot of other cities, the $15 an hour is laughable. If you told someone you're going to give them $15 an hour, they'd still laugh because they still can't afford, a third of the rent, in a one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco to share with, several other people. So they can't even afford that. So what I want to do is tack it to the cost of living in that area. But what happens when you do that is you have a stagnant minimum wage or living wage, and then the corporations will just raise their prices. So on top of that, we need to tack that to the consumer price index. So what happens basically is the corporations raise their prices, and then that wage follows those prices up. So sooner or later, they're going to have to cut into their profits and to actually pay their workers like they should have done in the first place. So that's what actually brings up that $15 an hour to a cost of living in the area and make sure it stays at that level. The problem with a stagnant wage like here in California, we have a quote unquote $15 an hour minimum wage law we passed. It doesn't go into effect for several years, basically for the full $15 an hour. By the time it gets there, it's going to be meaningless unless the market crashes and then things are affordable to live again in housing anyway. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be enough. And passing a stagnant minimum wage does not help anybody at the end of the day. Well, it helps corporations, but that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Valid point. If you, what is something you would like to leave with our viewers tonight? Anyone who's in California, but also anyone who knows people in California, so that they submit your name to them and tell them to look into you more, and they should check out voting for you. What do you want to leave our viewers with?
I spoke at Costa Mesa Our Revolutions event last night, and most of my speech was based on background. So there's a lot of rumors going around that me and other candidates in the race, they're attacking our experience or lack of it. So like I mentioned earlier, I have 10 years of experience around the legislature. I actually graduated with a political science or a bachelor's in political science. 7 of the years of experience were as a legislative analyst, actually digging through policy and bills and deciding or figuring out what the policy and fiscal impacts of those bills are. So this is literally what I do for my day job, and I have done for the last 7 years. So this isn't me, coming from, a dog catcher position or something like that and running for U.S. Senate. I actually have the experience in the background in several different areas, transportation, healthcare, and labor being the main 3. Mental health being a close 4th. So I have all of these policy areas that I've actually worked on and I actually have experience in. So what I want to leave you with basically is if you want someone who has the experience to go forward on multiple issues, then I'm your candidate. That's who you should vote for in this race. There's other candidates who have raised more money. There's other candidates have, done better in polls here and there. But the latest poll out is just disastrous for basically everyone, except for Feinstein. But But at the end of the day, I have the experience to do this job. I have the will to do it. I have the spine to bring the fight to Washington. I have the spine to bring the fight to the Democratic Party. I've been in the streets for several different issues. I don't just ask other people to unify on everyone else's issues. I actually show up for those issues. Plenty of proof for that. No one on the local level will ever dispute that. I was in the Bernie Sanders office in Sacramento for over 70 hours a week, sending out canvassers as a staging location director. So this is not something I decided to do one day or someone else put me up to it, or I'm doing it for my own benefit or my own future, or I have some weird intentions or anything like that. This is an actual Bernie-crat who worked in a Bernie Sanders office more than he actually worked his full-time job, and just to try and get somebody into office who had integrity and who was honest. So that's what I try to imitate going forward, and that's really what I'm running for: corporate-free, integrity, and actually running a campaign without, personal attacks and, making up stories about other candidates. So if that's what you want to see in office, then I'm your guy. You can look up more information at davidforcalifornia.com. It's the word for, not the number. It's actually on my banner back here. And you can catch me on Twitter and on Facebook, on also Instagram as well. That's all available through the website. So you can just click on the link from there. But thanks for having me on and asking the questions. I haven't come across a question that I considered a gotcha question yet. So I just answer everything honestly.
Well,
And
that's because I like you. I'm different with,
yeah, well,
it depends on the candidate.
I've been verbally assaulted and during this race, and questioned in an interrogative way by people who are obviously working for the opponent in ways that they were trying to mean to embarrass me in front of different people. And I will still answer honestly, and I'll answer what my platform stands for and what I stand for and what the progressive movement stands for. And if people don't like that, then they don't vote for me or they don't endorse me. But I don't care. I've lost endorsements or lost the chance to get endorsements in the Democratic Party system and clubs because of the fact that I've endorsed outside of my own party. So I don't care about that. I care about honesty and integrity. I care about selecting the best person for the job, not the person whose dad gave him the most money or who took the most corporate donation, who has the most mailers or most advertisements. At the end of the day, if we vote like that, that's exactly what we're going to end up with. And that's not what we want.
100%. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Also, guys, I just want to reiterate, since he is running for U.S. Senate, anyone in California can vote for him regardless of district. It's obsolete. Definitely get out there and vote progressive, vote Bernie-crat. You don't vote, you can't complain. It really is that simple. So thank you guys so much. Remember, June 5th, it's going to be a huge, huge, huge day for California. And we need to, F up the establishment. So definitely get to those polls. So tomorrow night, I also have another California candidate, and Friday night as well. So thank you guys again for watching, and thank you so much, David. Best of luck.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Take care.
Have a good one.